She just wanted to show pride in her father, but she was treated like she was crazy. Prejudice isolated her, and no one believed her story, until the moment the most elegant man in the city entered the school. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. Sophia was 6 years old and woke up every day to the sound of birds singing, nesting in the backyard of the simple house where she lived with her father and grandmother in the Northwood district of Portland. The house was small, with walls that begged for a fresh coat of paint, a rusty gate, and a garden where Grandma Helen, her grandmother, lovingly cultivated some rose bushes and a cherry plum tree that bore fruit every summer. The girl's routine was marked by the sweetness of mornings spent with her grandmother. While her father left before sunrise, Sophia woke up to the smell of fresh coffee that Grandma Helen prepared on the old 4-burner stove, the kind that hissed when the water boiled. The kitchen was the heart of the home, with faded tiles, a green formica, table and chairs that creaked with every movement. There, between buttered toast and chocolate milk, her grandmother told stories from her youth, from times when the world seemed simpler and people knew each other by name. Sophia loved these mornings. She sat on the chair with her short legs swinging, still too short to reach the floor, and listened to her grandmother's every word as if they were precious secrets. Grandma Helen had white hair tied in a loose bun, hands calloused from work, and a smile that calmed any storm. It was she who braided her granddaughter's hair every morning, making 2 firm braids that bounced when Sophia ran around the yard. Sophia's father, Richard, was a man of few words. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with a serene gaze, he left home before 5 in the morning and returned only when the moon was high in the sky. He drove a faded brown 1983 Chevy Nova that made noise when started and spewed black smoke when climbing hills. The car was old, but it worked, and for Sophia, that was enough. She didn't understand brands, models, or status. For her, what mattered was that her father came home every night with a kiss on her forehead and a tight hug that made everything worthwhile. No one in the neighborhood had any idea who Richard truly was. He wore simple shirts, faded jeans, and shoes worn by time. He greeted neighbors with discreet nods, helped carry groceries when he saw someone struggling, and never flaunted any sign of wealth. The truth was that Richard managed an empire built by generations of his family, with companies spread across the country, investments in strategic sectors, and assets worth unimaginable figures. But he had made a conscious choice to live far from luxury, far from the spotlight, far from the frivolity that money often brings. This choice had a profound reason. Richard grew up amidst luxury, surrounded by servants, amenities, and a loneliness that no mansion could fill. He saw relatives destroy family ties over inheritance, friends drift away due to envy, and money erode values he considered sacred. When Sophia was born, he swore he would raise his daughter differently. He wanted her to learn the value of simple things, to understand that character is worth more than wealth, to know how to differentiate genuine people from those who approach only out of self-interest. Grandma Helen, Richard's mother, supported her son's decision from the beginning. She herself had lived a youth marked by discrimination and judgments based on appearances. She knew her son was trying to protect his granddaughter from a cruel and superficial world, but deep down, she sometimes wondered if that path wouldn't bring unexpected consequences. Sophia was a cheerful child, full of life and imagination. She had large, curious brown eyes, straight, dark hair, and a laugh that brightened any room. At the neighborhood's public school, where she was in 1st grade, she was known for being creative and kind. She loved to draw, invent stories, and play during recess with any classmate who wanted to join her imaginary adventures. Sophia's teacher, Eleanor, was a 35-year-old woman with brown hair always tied in a ponytail, eyeglasses, and a demeanor that oscillated between rigidity and coolness. Eleanor came from a middle-class family that had been facing financial difficulties for several years. Her husband had lost his job, bills accumulated, and she felt the weight of the responsibility of supporting the household alone. This generated in her a silent resentment towards families who, in her view, pretended to be what they weren't, or flaunted what they had. At school, Eleanor maintained a reputation as a competent but distant teacher. She rarely smiled, rarely praised, and when she perceived that a child came from a more affluent family, her gaze became more critical. She couldn't avoid the constant comparison between her own life and that of others, and this consumed her internally. There was also an almost invisible staff member at the school, Mr. Anthony, the janitor. A 62-year-old black man, with grey hair and hands calloused from work. He spent his days cleaning corridors, tending the garden, and fixing what broke. Anthony was discreet, silent, and observant. He knew every child by name, knew who was happy and who carried secret sorrows. He himself had suffered prejudice throughout his life, bearing invisible scars from a society that judged him by his skin color and humble profession. Therefore he had a special eye for children who seemed different, who didn't fit in, who suffered in silence. It was on a sunny Monday in September that everything began to change. Teacher Eleanor entered the classroom with a proposal for art class. She asked each child to bring a family photo the following week, so that everyone could share a little about their lives. The activity would be presented as a mural, where each student would glue their photo and write a few words about who the most important people were to them. Sophia was excited. She loved talking about her father and grandmother, about mornings in the kitchen, about the stories she heard before bedtime. When she got home that day, she told Grandma Helen about the activity. Her grandmother, while peeling potatoes for dinner, smiled tenderly and said she would help choose the best photo. That night Richard arrived earlier than usual. He sat at the table for dinner with his mother and daughter, and Sophia, with shining eyes, told him about the school assignment. Richard listened attentively, asked a few questions about how the school year was going, and kissed his daughter's forehead before she went to sleep. In the following days, Sophia and Grandma Helen went through old albums in search of the perfect photo. They found an image taken in the backyard, on a sunny Sunday, where all three appeared together, smiling, in front of the cherry plum tree. The photo was simple, without elaborate settings or sophisticated clothes, but it overflowed with affection. On Friday it was presentation day. The children brought their photos and one by one they went to the front of the classroom to talk about their families. Some showed photos at birthday parties in event halls, others on trips to the beach, some in elegant restaurants. Eleanor observed everything carefully, making notes in a notebook. When it was Sophia's turn, she walked to the front of the classroom with the photo in her hands. She glued the image to the mural and with a sweet and clear voice began to speak. She talked about her grandmother who made the best braids in the world, about her father who worked hard but always came home with a warm hug, about mornings in the kitchen and stories before bedtime. And then, without malice, without ulterior motives, Sophia said something that would change everything. She looked at the teacher and her classmates and, with the innocence of someone who only knows the truth, stated that her father was a very wealthy man, but had chosen to live simply to teach her important values. The silence that followed was heavy. For a few seconds no one reacted. Then a muffled laugh came from the back of the room, then another and another. In a few moments half the class was laughing, pointing at Sophia and making comments among themselves. Teacher Eleanor frowned. She looked at the girl with an expression that mixed incredulity and something darker. She said nothing to interrupt the laughter. She just crossed her arms and watched, with a slight smile on her lips, as if watching a predictable scene. Sophia felt her face flush. She didn't understand why they were laughing. She looked around, confused, searching for a sign of support. But the glances she met were of mockery, disbelief, judgment. A girl named Rebecca, daughter of a well-known lawyer in the area, was the first to verbalize what everyone was thinking. "She's a liar, teacher. Her dad drives that old car, and she comes in sandals every day. How can he be rich?" Other voices joined in. One boy called Sophia fanciful. Another child said she was making up stories for attention. Teacher Eleanor, instead of intervening, simply said in a neutral tone that everyone had the right to believe what they wanted, but it was important to be honest about one's own reality. Sophia returned to her seat with teary eyes. She sat in silence, trying to understand what had happened. She had only told the truth. Why did no one believe her? At recess, the situation worsened. A group of children surrounded her in the playground, asking questions in a mocking tone. "Where's your dad's fancy car? Why don't you wear a designer uniform? Where's the mansion?" Sophia tried to explain, but every word she spoke was met with more laughter. She felt a tightness in her chest, a sense of injustice she had never experienced before. From a distance, Mr. Anthony observed everything. He was sweeping dry leaves near the gate, but his eyes were fixed on what was happening in the playground. He saw the girls suffering, saw the cruelty disguised as play, and felt an old pain tighten his heart. He wanted to intervene, but he knew his word carried little weight in that environment. Still, he decided he would do something, however small, to show the girl that not everyone judged her. That afternoon, when Sophia opened her backpack to put away her pencil case, she found a small folded note. The handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. Don't give up on being who you are. The truth always shines, even when no one wants to see it. Sophia read the note several times. She didn't know who had written it, but those words brought some comfort to her wounded heart. She put the paper in her pocket and decided that, no matter how difficult it was, she would continue to be herself. In the following days, the situation at school intensified. The children started calling Sophia cruel nicknames: Princess of Lies, Queen of Sandals, Chevy Nova's daughter. The nicknames spread quickly, and even children from other classes began to mock her in the hallways. Handmade posters started appearing on the school's bulletin boards, malicious drawings showing a girl with a crooked crown and torn sandals, with phrases like "Sophia the Liar" or "the rich girl who lives in a rundown neighborhood." The school administration removed the posters when they found them, but new ones appeared the next day. Teacher Eleanor, when questioned by other staff about the children's behavior, responded with ambiguous phrases. She said she couldn't control childish imagination, that children at that age had difficulty separating fantasy from reality, and that perhaps Sophia's family needed psychological counseling. These words spread among the parents. During informal meetings at school dismissal, mothers and fathers began to comment on the girl who invented absurd stories. Some expressed concern, questioning whether the child might be having emotional problems. Others were harsher, suggesting that the family was trying to pass themselves off as something they weren't, perhaps to gain some kind of advantage or benefit. Sophia began to realize that the isolation was no longer limited to the children. Some parents looked at her with suspicion when they passed her. Others prevented their children from playing with her. The girl, who was once cheerful and sociable, began to withdraw. She started staying quiet in corners during recess, avoiding eye contact with anyone. At home, Grandma Helen noticed the change in her granddaughter's behavior. Sophia, who always came home from school talking non-stop about what she had learned, now entered in silence, went straight to her room, and spent hours lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her grandmother tried to talk to her, but the girl just said she was tired. One night, while preparing dinner, Grandma Helen heard sobs coming from the bedroom. She rushed there and found Sophia crying, hugging her pillow. Her grandmother sat on the bed and pulled her granddaughter onto her lap, stroking her hair tenderly. "What is it, my dear? Tell me what's happening." Sophia, through tears, told her everything. She spoke about the laughter, about the nicknames, about the teacher who did nothing to help, about the parents who looked at her as if she were a problematic child. She said she had only told the truth, but no one believed her. Grandma Helen felt her heart ache. She hugged her granddaughter tightly, trying to convey all the love she felt, but inside she was conflicted. Part of her wanted to go to the school and confront those people. Another part wondered if her son wasn't making a mistake by hiding the family's true financial condition. Was protecting Sophia from the world's superficiality worth it, if it meant exposing her to another kind of cruelty? That night, when Richard arrived home from work, Grandma Helen was waiting for him in the living room. She told him everything her granddaughter had revealed, every detail of the suffering the girl was facing. Richard listened in silence, his jaw tense and his fists clenched. He felt a deep anger, not at the children but at the adults who fueled that prejudice, who judged without knowing, who taught their children to measure worth by appearances. But at the same time, he questioned himself. Was his decision to live humbly fair to his daughter? Was he, by trying to protect her from one type of suffering, not exposing her to another equally painful? Richard went up to his daughter's room. Sophia was lying down, pretending to sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed and gently ran his hand through her hair. The girl opened her eyes and, seeing her father there, couldn't hold back her tears. "Dad, why doesn't anyone believe me?" Richard pulled her into a tight hug. He felt his daughter's fragility, the pain of being rejected for something that should be a source of pride. And at that moment he made a decision. He wouldn't reveal everything immediately, but would wait for the right moment, the moment when the truth would have the necessary impact to teach not only his daughter, but everyone who had judged her, a lesson about humility, character, and the superficiality of judgments. "My daughter, sometimes people need to see to believe, and when the right time comes, they will see. For now, I want you to know that I believe in you, Grandma believes in you, and that's what matters. You are telling the truth, and the truth always prevails, even if it takes time." Sophia nestled in her father's arms, feeling a little comfort, but still carrying the pain of rejection. That night, she slept restlessly, with confused dreams where voices called her a liar and familiar faces judged her with cold stares. In the school hallways, Mr. Anthony continued his silent routine, but every day he left a new note in Sophia's backpack. Sometimes they were words of encouragement, other times simple drawings of flowers or birds. The girl began to look forward to those small gestures, and they became her anchor amidst the storm of judgments she faced. The hostility, however, was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The following week brought new challenges for Sophia. The school, once a place of learning and joy, had transformed into a minefield, where every step had to be calculated. The girl began to develop survival strategies. She always arrived at the last minute to avoid waiting in the playground, sat at the back of the classroom to avoid drawing attention, and during recess sought refuge in the library, where the silent company of books was less painful than the rejection of her classmates. Rebecca, the girl who had been the first to mock Sophia, intensified her provocations. She came from a traditional Portland family, lived in a 3-bedroom apartment in Windsor Heights, and studied ballet at a private school on weekends. Her parents were demanding and distant, always too busy to give her the attention she needed. Rebecca had learned early. On that to be noticed, she had to stand out, and she discovered that ridiculing others was an effective way to gain prominence. She organized a group of girls who systematically pursued Sophia. During recess, they formed circles where they whispered and laughed every time Sophia passed. In physical education class, they excluded her from games, saying they didn't want to play with liars. When the teacher divided the class into pairs, no one wanted to partner with her, and Sophia always ended up alone, having to work by herself, or being reluctantly included in a group that received her with ill will. Teacher Eleanor observed all of this with disturbing coldness. When other teachers commented on Sophia's isolation, she changed the subject or suggested that the girl might need psychological counseling for having difficulty distinguishing fantasy from reality. This narrative spread among the school staff, creating an image of Sophia as a problematic child. What no one knew was that Eleanor had her own internal battles. Every night, she returned home and faced the reality of overdue bills, an unemployed husband who spent his days on the couch watching television, a marriage slowly falling apart. She looked at families who seemed to have everything and felt a corrosive envy. Therefore, when Sophia claimed to come from a wealthy family, something in her refused to believe it. It was easier to discredit the girl than to admit that perhaps there were people who had resources but chose simplicity. One afternoon during English class, Eleanor asked the students to write an essay on the topic of honesty. Sophia, feeling the weight of that request, wrote with a heavy heart about how painful it was to tell the truth and not be believed. She described her feelings of confusion and sadness, questioning why people judge so much by appearances. When Eleanor read the essay, she felt a momentary discomfort, a flash of conscience about the role she was playing in that situation. But she quickly dismissed the thought, convincing herself that she was just being realistic, protecting the other children from negative influences. Meanwhile, at the school entrance, another drama unfolded. Marina, Rebecca's mother, was a 40-year-old woman, always impeccably dressed, with dyed blonde hair and perfectly manicured nails. She led an informal group of mothers who met daily at school dismissal to chat about pleasantries, but mainly to gossip about other families. Marina had her own insecurities hidden beneath that facade of perfection. Her marriage had been in silent crisis for years. Her husband, a successful lawyer, spent more and more time at the office, and she suspected it wasn't just work keeping him away from home. To compensate for the emotional emptiness, Marina obsessively dedicated herself to maintaining appearances. Every designer outfit she bought for Rebecca, every dinner at expensive restaurants, every perfectly edited photo on social media was a desperate attempt to prove to the world that her life was enviable. But the truth was that she felt profoundly alone. Rebecca grew increasingly distant. Her husband barely looked her in the eyes, and she herself had become a superficial version of who she once dreamed of being. Seeing families who seemed happy despite their simplicity bothered Marina viscerally. It was a cruel mirror that reflected everything she had lost in pursuit of status. Therefore, when Sophia spoke about her rich father, something in Marina refused to believe it. It was more comfortable to discredit the girl than to face the possibility that perhaps there were people authentic enough to choose values over ostentation. Her daughter Rebecca absorbed every behavior of her mother as a silent lesson. She learned that people's worth lay in the brands they wore, the places they frequented, the image they projected, and so she perpetuated the cycle of superficiality and judgment. It was Marina who turned Sophia's case into a public scandal. She began spreading among the other mothers that there was a child at school with serious fantasy problems who invented stories about wealth to compensate for a difficult life. She said, with an air of false concern, that it was a sign that the family needed help, perhaps social assistance. The other mothers, many of whom also came from middle-class families and had their own financial insecurities, absorbed that narrative with ease. It was comforting to believe that someone was worse off than them, that there was a more dysfunctional family to serve as a contrast. One morning, as Grandma Helen dropped Sophia off at school, Marina approached her directly. With a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she asked if everything was all right at home, if the family needed any help. Grandma Helen, sensing the condescending tone, politely replied that everything was fine, thank you, but Marina insisted, saying she had heard worrying things about her granddaughter inventing fanciful stories. Grandma Helen felt anger rise in her throat, but she maintained her composure. She looked Marina in the eyes and said firmly that Sophia never invented stories, that she was an honest and truthful child. Marina laughed disdainfully and retorted that all mothers thought their children were perfect, but that reality was different. That conversation marked a turning point. Grandma Helen realized that the problem was much bigger than a few children bullying. It was an entire community that had decided to judge and condemn a 6-year-old child based on prejudice and appearances. That night she spoke with Richard again, this time with more urgency in her voice. "My son, this is getting out of control. Sophia is suffering too much. You need to do something." Richard listened to his mother attentively. He knew she was right, but he also knew that any hasty action could worsen the situation. He decided he would wait a little longer, until the talent fair event that would take place in a few weeks. There, in front of everyone, he would reveal the truth in a way that no one could question. But before he could execute his plan, another obstacle arose. Frederick Alton, Richard's partner for over 15 years, discovered through contacts what was happening with Sophia. He scheduled an urgent meeting at the company's central office, a 20-story mirrored building in the Southview business district of Portland. Frederick was a 52-year-old man, always dressed in Italian suits, driving imported cars, and frequenting the social circles of the Oregonian elite. He had built his reputation based on image and connections. For him, Richard's decision to live simply had always been a tolerable eccentricity, but now he saw it as a threat. When Richard arrived, at the meeting room, Frederick was waiting for him with a grave expression. He closed the door and went straight to the point. "Richard, I heard your daughter is having problems at school because of your decision to live as if you don't have money. This is starting to generate comments. Do you understand what this could mean for the company's image?" Richard crossed his arms and replied calmly, "Sophia is having problems because we live in a superficial society that judges people by appearance. This has nothing to do with the company. Frederick slammed his hand on the table. It has everything to do with it. We are an investment company, Richard. Our credibility depends on the trust we convey. If they start spreading that one of the partners lives in a humble house, driving an old car, they will question our financial management capabilities. They will think we don't know how to handle money. Richard remained calm, but his voice was firm. Or they will think that we are people who value what truly matters, that we don't need to flaunt to prove our worth. Frederick sighed, running his hand through his perfectly combed hair. You're being idealistic. In the real world, appearances matter. And if you insist on maintaining this stance, at least keep it out of the spotlight. Don't do anything that exposes the company. Don't do anything that draws attention. Richard knew that Frederick was only concerned with profits and corporate reputation, but he also knew that his partner had influence among other investors. A public fight could harm not only his career, but also the jobs of hundreds of employees. I will do what needs to be done to protect my daughter, and no one will tell me how I should live my personal life. Frederick was silent for a few seconds, then shook his head. You'll regret this, Richard. Mark my words. While the adults fought their battles, Sophia continued to face hers. The isolation at school intensified when a new episode occurred during science class. The teacher asked the students to work in groups of 4 to make a model of the solar system. As always, no one wanted Sophia in their group. The teacher, unlike Eleanor, was more attentive and noticed what was happening. She intervened, saying that the groups would be drawn to ensure fairness. Sophia ended up in the same group as Rebecca, and the tension was palpable. During the days of group work, Rebecca and the other girls practically ignored Sophia. They talked among themselves, decided everything without consulting her, and when she tried to offer suggestions, she was summarily ignored. On presentation day, when the teacher asked about each member's participation, the girls shamelessly lied, saying that Sophia had not helped at all. Sophia tried to defend herself, but her voice came out weak, trembling. The science teacher, without knowing the full context, only gave a mild scolding about teamwork, but the humiliation was done. Sophia felt small, invisible, as if her voice didn't matter. It was that day she found another note from Mr. Anthony. This time it wasn't just words of encouragement, but a small drawing of a bird trapped in a cage, with the door open, about to fly. Below, written in that shaky handwriting, "You are stronger than you think. One day, everyone will see." Sophia cherished that drawing. She didn't know who her invisible guardian angel was, but those gestures were all that kept her going. Mr. Anthony, in turn, watched everything from afar with a heavy heart. He remembered when he was young, when he too was judged and excluded for being different, for not fitting expected standards. He bore deep scars from a time when skin color determined where he could sit, where he could study, who he could be. He saw in Sophia a reflection of his own pains, and even without being able to intervene directly, he did what he could. One afternoon, while cleaning the teacher's lounge, he overheard a conversation between Eleanor and other teachers. They were commenting on Sophia, on how the girl seemed increasingly withdrawn, on how her parents should seek professional help. Eleanor said with that tone of false concern that it was sad to see a child so disconnected from reality. Mr. Anthony felt like intervening, like saying that the girl was not disconnected, that she had only told the truth and no one wanted to listen. But he knew that his word, the word of an elderly black janitor, would have no weight in that environment. Still, he decided he needed to do something more concrete. He sought out the school principal, a 50-year-old woman named Beatrice, who had managed the institution for 2 decades. Beatrice was a dedicated educator, but also someone who avoided confrontations and problems that could tarnish the school's reputation. Mr. Anthony knocked on the principal's office door and, when allowed to enter, explained what was happening with Sophia. He told about the bullying, about the nicknames, about the systematic isolation. Beatrice listened attentively, but her response was disappointing. "Anthony, I understand your concern, but you need to understand that children at this age can be cruel to each other. That's part of social development. Besides, I spoke with teacher Eleanor, and she told me that the girl has trouble separating fantasy from reality." perhaps the bullying, is a natural consequence of that. Mr. Anthony felt a deep sadness. Even the principal had bought into the narrative built against Sophia. He tried to argue, but realized he was fighting a losing battle. He left the room certain that the system was not there to protect children like Sophia. It was there to maintain the status quo, to avoid problems, to preserve appearances. That week, the situation reached its peak. During recess, a group of children led by Rebecca surrounded Sophia in the playground. They formed a circle around her and began to sing a cruel song they had invented, something about a lying princess who lived in a cardboard castle. Sophia tried to get out of the circle, but they closed in. She tried to ask them to stop, but their voices grew louder. She felt tears streaming down her face, felt her chest tighten, felt like she was suffocating. That's when Mr. Anthony appeared. He walked up to the group with firm steps and for the first time in years used a voice of authority that surprised everyone. "That's enough. All of you disperse now." The children froze for a moment, then scattered across the playground. Mr. Anthony knelt beside Sophia, who was trembling, and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, little one. Take a deep breath. It will pass." Sophia looked at the man she always saw in the hallways, but had never spoken to. She saw kindness in those tired eyes. She saw understanding. She saw someone who truly cared. And at that moment, she knew it was he who left the notes. "Thank you, Mr. Anthony." The janitor smiled, a sad but tender smile. "You're welcome, dear. You are stronger than you think. Keep being who you are." Mr. Anthony helped Sophia up and walked with her to a bench under a tree. He sat beside the girl, keeping a respectful distance, and stayed there in silence for a few minutes, just making sure she was okay. He saw the tears still streaming down her little face, saw her small shoulders trembling with suppressed sobs. "You know, Sophia, when I was about your age, I also went through difficult things. People judged me without knowing me, said cruel things, made me feel small, and for a long time, I believed them. I believed that maybe they were right, that maybe I really wasn't worth anything." Sophia looked at him with wide eyes, surprised that such a kind man could have suffered something similar. "But do you know what I learned after many years?" Anthony continued, his voice choked with emotion. "I learned that people who judge others by appearances are the ones with the emptiest hearts. They need to diminish others to feel big themselves. And you, little one, don't need to become small just because they want you to. You are exactly the size you need to be." The janitor's words penetrated deep into Sophia's heart. For the first time in weeks, she felt that someone truly understood her, someone who knew exactly what she was going through because they had been there too. "Do you still leave the notes?" Sophia asked timidly. Anthony smiled, wiping a tear that escaped his own eye. "I'll keep leaving them as long as you need them, and even after if you want, because everyone deserves to know they're not alone." That moment deeply marked Sophia. There, on that bench under the tree, with a janitor whom the whole world ignored, she found more humanity and kindness than she had found in anyone else at school. And she kept that lesson in her heart, that a person's worth is not in the position they hold or the money they have, but in the ability to see another's suffering and extend a hand. That night, when Sophia told Grandma Helen what had happened, her grandmother could no longer contain her emotions. She cried with her granddaughter, feeling helpless in the face of such cruelty. When Richard arrived, he found them both embracing in the living room, and he knew he could no longer wait. It was time to act. Richard spent the entire night awake, sitting on the porch of the Simple house, looking at the starry Portland sky. The cool morning breeze carried the scent of the cherry plum trees in the backyard, but his mind was far away. He thought of his daughter, the suffering she was facing, the decision he had made years ago to live a simple life. He had chosen that path with the best intentions. He had grown up amidst luxury, seen money corrupt family ties, turn friends into opportunists, and empty the meaning of human relationships. When Sophia was born, he swore it would be different. He wanted her to learn about humility, about character, about the value of things money cannot buy. He vividly recalled his own childhood in a huge mansion, where silence echoed through empty corridors. He had everything money could buy, except what mattered most: presence, genuine affection, true connections. Birthday parties were grand but cold, with children whose parents strategically chose them for their surnames and family connections. He never knew who his true friends were, and who was there just for the wealth. He saw his own father, a brilliant businessman but emotionally distant, consumed by greed and the constant need to accumulate more. He saw uncles fight fiercely over inheritance, destroying bonds that should be sacred. He saw cousins become strangers, separated by jealousy and petty competitions over who had more, who was more successful. When he decided to have a daughter, he promised himself it would be different, that Sophia would grow up knowing the value of work, simplicity, gratitude for small things. He imagined that by protecting her from the world of ostentation, he would be giving her the greatest possible gift: an authentic childhood, true relationships, a solid character. But now he wondered if he hadn't been naive. Had he underestimated the world's cruelty? Had he, by trying to protect her from one type of superficiality, not exposed her to another equally painful type of violence? The questions echoed in his mind without easy answers. Grandma Helen joined him on the porch around 4 in the morning. She brought 2 cups of coffee and sat silently beside her son. They stayed that way for long minutes, just watching the city fall asleep and wake up, until she finally spoke. "You know, I've always supported your choices. I've always understood why you wanted to raise Sophia away from luxury. But, my son, isn't it time to reconsider?" Richard took a sip of the bitter coffee. "It's not about reconsidering, Mom. It's about showing these people that they are wrong, that they judged without knowing, that they hurt a child out of pure prejudice. And how do you intend to do that without hurting Sophia even more? I'll wait for the talent fair. It's in 2 weeks. There, in front of everyone, I will show who we really are. But I won't do it arrogantly or ostentatiously. I will do it with dignity." Grandma Helen sighed. She knew her son well enough to know that once he made a decision, nothing would make him change his mind. She only hoped it wouldn't cause her granddaughter more pain. The days that followed were perhaps the most difficult for Sophia. The hostility at school had become almost systemic. It was no longer just Rebecca and her group. Other children, influenced by their parents and the narrative that had been built, also kept their distance. Sophia had become a pariah, someone with whom one should not associate. During classes, she sat in silence, trying to concentrate on the material, but her mind wandered. She wondered why she had spoken about her father, why she hadn't simply invented a different story, a story that people would believe. But at the same time, something within her refused to regret having told the truth. It was during this period that Marina, Rebecca's mother, decided to escalate the conflict even further. She scheduled a meeting with Principal Beatrice, bringing with her 3 other mothers who shared her concerns. They sat in the principal's office, all perfectly dressed, with an air of moral superiority, and presented their complaints. "Principal Beatrice, we are very concerned about the situation involving student Sophia. Our daughters are coming home reporting absurd stories, the girl tells. This is causing confusion, and frankly, we are questioning whether a child with this type of behavior should be in a regular school." Beatrice, always cautious, tried to ease the situation. "I understand your concerns, but you need to understand that children at this age have a lot of imagination. We cannot judge so severely." Marina leaned forward with a serious expression. "It's not about imagination, Principal. It's about lies, and lies that can harm the emotional health of our children. My Rebecca is having nightmares, worried about her classmate who invents such elaborate stories. We question if this isn't a sign of deeper problems in the family." The other mothers nodded in agreement, creating collective pressure. Beatrice felt cornered. She promised she would talk to Sophia's family, that she might suggest psychological counseling, anything to calm those women and avoid more problems. When the meeting ended, Beatrice was left alone in her office, feeling conflicted. Part of her knew that this was wrong, that they were judging a child unfairly. But another part, the part that worried about the school's reputation and the satisfaction of paying parents, just wanted the problem to disappear. Meanwhile, Richard put his plan into action. In the following days, he began to make discreet preparations. He spoke with his personal assistant, Marcus, a trusted man who had worked with him for years, and explained what he needed. "Marcus, I want you to organize everything for Sophia's school talent fair. I'll need the car, the driver, and I want you to prepare some documents that prove my financial situation. Nothing ostentatious, just what's necessary to prove the truth." Marcus, who knew the story well and admired Richard's stance, readily agreed. He began working on the details, ensuring everything would be perfect for the day. However, Frederick Alton discovered the plans through mutual contacts. He scheduled another urgent meeting, this time more aggressive in his approach. "Richard, I heard you're planning to make a public appearance at your daughter's school. This is madness. You'll expose not only yourself but the entire company. The press could pick this up. They could create narratives we can't control." Richard remained firm. "Frederick, my daughter is suffering because of prejudice and unfair judgments. I will restore her dignity, and if that bothers you or anyone, else it's not my problem." Frederick turned red with anger. "You are putting personal feelings above the company's interests. This could have serious corporate consequences. The other partners will not accept this idly." Richard stood up, facing his partner with determination. "Then let them take whatever measures they deem necessary. But I will not abandon my daughter to protect corporate interests. I have never done that, and I never will." The meeting ended in a tense atmosphere. Frederick left, slamming the door, already planning his next political moves within the company. Richard knew he would face consequences. But at that moment, nothing mattered more than Sophia. At school, Mr. Anthony continued to be the only adult who truly cared about the girl's well-being. He watched her in the hallways, saw how she walked with her head down, how she avoided eye contact with everyone. He continued leaving notes, but now with more specific messages, preparing her for something bigger that was to come. One of the notes said, "The strongest storms come before the rainbow. Stay strong." Another said, "He who laughs last, laughs best. Your time will come." Sophia kept all those notes in a small box under her bed. They became her secret treasure, her proof that at least one person in the world, even anonymously, believed in her. One afternoon, a few days before the talent fair, the most traumatic episode of all occurred. Marina, Rebecca's mother, purposely waited at the school exit until Grandma Helen arrived to pick up Sophia. As the grandmother and granddaughter were leaving the gate, Marina approached them directly in front of other mothers, fathers, and staff. "Grandma Helen, we need to talk. I don't think you realize the problem your granddaughter is causing." Grandma Helen stopped, holding Sophia's hand firmly. She felt her granddaughter tremble beside her. "What problem, madam?" Marina crossed her arms, adopting a posture of superiority. "Your granddaughter has been inventing absurd stories about wealth, about your son being a rich businessman. This is traumatizing my daughter and other children. They get confused, they question why Sophia invents these things. Frankly, I think you need professional help." People around stopped to observe the scene. Sophia felt all eyes on her, felt the weight of collective judgment. Grandma Helen, trying to remain calm, responded with a firm but trembling voice. "My granddaughter doesn't invent stories. She told the truth. And if people don't believe her, that's their problem, not hers." Marina laughed disdainfully. "Truth? Look around you, Grandma Helen. Look at yourselves. You live in a humble house. Your son drives a car that looks 30 years old. Where is the wealth? Or do you really believe in this fantasy you've created?" Other mothers began to murmur among themselves. Some shook their heads in disapproval. Others looked at Sophia with pity. The girl began to cry, trying to hide her face in her grandmother's dress. Grandma Helen felt an anger she had never felt before. She wanted to scream. She wanted to defend her granddaughter tooth and nail. But she knew that any explosive reaction would only confirm the narrative that they were a problematic family. She took a deep breath and said, with all the dignity she could muster, "The truth always comes out, madam, and when it does, I hope you have the humility to recognize your mistake." Marina made a dismissive gesture with her hand. "Well, I'll wait seated. Now, do us all a favor and seek help for your family, before this harms the child even more." Grandma Helen took Sophia by the hand and walked towards the Chevy Nova parked on the street. Each step was heavy. Each glance she felt on her back was like a stab. Inside the car, Sophia broke down in tears, and Grandma Helen, heartbroken, couldn't hold back her own. Her grandmother's hands trembled as she tried to put the key in the ignition. It took her 3 attempts to succeed. As the old Chevy Nova engine coughed to life, she looked in the rearview mirror and saw Marina still standing there, talking to other mothers, probably narrating the scene she had just played a part in. She saw the smiles of satisfaction, the nods of agreement, the cruelty disguised as social concern. Grandma Helen had faced many difficulties in life. She had raised her son practically alone after her husband left, worked 3 jobs to ensure Richard had a quality education, spent sleepless nights sewing clothes for others to pay the bills. She had scars from battles no one saw, stories of overcoming that she never told. But nothing, absolutely nothing, hurt as much as seeing her granddaughter suffer and not being able to protect her completely. Sophia continued crying in the passenger seat, trying to shrink, as if she wanted to disappear. Her grandmother reached out and held her granddaughter's hand, squeezing tightly, trying to convey all the love and strength she still had. But inside she felt fragile, questioning if she had failed in some way, if she should have reacted differently, if she should have defended her granddaughter more vehemently. "Grandma, why are people so mean?" Sophia asked between sobs. The simple but devastating question echoed inside the old car. Grandma Helen didn't have an answer that made sense to a 6-year-old. She couldn't explain about envy, about projected insecurities, about how adults can be even crueler than children when they feel threatened in their own vulnerabilities. "Sometimes, my dear, people have so much pain inside them that the only way they find to feel better is by causing pain to others. But that has nothing to do with you. You are perfect just the way you are." "But I only told the truth, Grandma. Why doesn't anyone believe me?" Grandma Helen felt the tears flowing stronger. She pulled the car to the shoulder of the road because she could no longer see clearly through her blurred vision. She turned to her granddaughter and pulled her into a tight hug. "I know, my dear, I know, and the truth will come out. Your father will make it appear. You just need to hold on a little longer. Can you do that for Grandma?" Sophia nodded against her grandmother's shoulder, but both knew that request was too heavy for such small shoulders. They drove in silence until they reached home, where Grandma Helen helped her granddaughter out of the car, and they went inside together. The simple house, which had always been a refuge of love and peace, that day seemed too small to contain such great pain. When Richard arrived a few hours later, he found his mother and daughter sitting on the sofa, still in silence, still processing the public humiliation. Grandma Helen told him everything, every cruel word, every judgmental look, every second of that painful scene. Richard felt something break inside him. It was no longer just about teaching values or protecting his daughter from superficiality. It was about justice, about dignity, about showing all those people who judged without knowing the weight of their words. He knelt in front of Sophia, held her face with both hands, and looked into his daughter's tear-filled eyes. "Sophia, my little one, you have endured so much, more than any child should endure, but I promise you that all of this will end. In a few days at the talent fair, everyone will know the truth, and those who hurt you will have to look into your eyes and acknowledge their mistake. But Dad, what if they still don't believe?" Richard pulled her into a tight hug. "They will believe, because this time I won't leave room for doubt." That night, as Sophia finally slept, exhausted from crying so much, Richard made important calls. He spoke with Marcus, confirmed all the details, ensured everything would be perfect. He also spoke with his lawyer, preparing for the possible corporate consequences of his decision. Frederick tried to call several times, but Richard did not answer. He knew his partner would try to dissuade him, threaten him, perhaps even use emotional blackmail, but none of that mattered anymore. The next day, Sophia woke up and for the first time in weeks saw her father still at home. Richard had decided to miss work to spend the day with her. They made pancakes together for breakfast, drew in the backyard, read stories. It was a simple day but full of love, a reminder that regardless of everything happening outside, within that humble home, they were a family. Grandma Helen watched from afar, with tears in her eyes, seeing her son try to heal his granddaughter's wounds with affection and presence. She thought about everything she had lived through, the discrimination she faced when she was young, the times she was also judged by appearances. History repeated itself, but this time she hoped the outcome would be different. The days passed quickly. The entire school was preparing for the Talent Fair, an annual event where children presented artistic skills, performances, and scientific projects. It was the most anticipated event of the year, with a massive presence of parents, family members, and even community members. Sophia, who had previously been excited to participate in the fair, now felt only anxiety. She had prepared a dance presentation, something simple, but which she had rehearsed with dedication. But now, the idea of being on stage, exposed to the gazes of all those who judged her, was terrifying. Richard noticed his daughter's fear and, the night before the fair, sat down with her for a serious conversation. "Sophia, I know you're scared, and it's okay to be scared, but I want you to know that tomorrow, when you go up on that stage, I will be there. And I won't just be in the audience. I will show everyone who we really are. Do you trust me?" Sophia looked at her father, seeing in his eyes the same determination and love she had always known. "I trust you, Dad." "Then dance with all the joy you have inside you. Show everyone that nothing they said could extinguish your light. Can you do that for me?" Sophia nodded, feeling some confidence return. That night she slept better than she had in weeks, with the feeling that something big was about to happen, and it was. The day of the Talent Fair dawned with a clear blue sky over Portland. The sun shone intensely, as if even the weather conspired to make that day special. In the simple house in the Northwood district, Sophia woke up early, with butterflies in her stomach and a mixture of anxiety and hope in her heart. Grandma Helen prepared a special breakfast with homemade cheese scones, freshly squeezed orange juice, and Sophia's favorite fruits. Her grandmother braided her granddaughter's hair with even more care than usual, making 2 perfect braids and adorning them with pink ribbons she had kept for years. Richard had left very early, saying only that he needed to resolve some things before the event. He left a kiss on his daughter's forehead and a look of complicity that said more than words could express. Sophia trusted her father, even without knowing exactly what he was planning. At 9 in the morning, Grandma Helen and Sophia arrived at school. The playground was transformed, decorated with colorful pennants, balloons and posters announcing the presentations. Several stalls had been set up, where children would display handicrafts, paintings, and scientific experiments. In the center, a small improvised stage awaited the artistic presentations. The movement was intense. Families arrived excited. Children ran around the playground rehearsing their last-minute presentations. Teachers organized lines and coordinated schedules. It was an event that mobilized the entire school community. When Sophia entered, she felt eyes turn to her. Some were curious, others held thinly veiled contempt, still others pity. Rebecca was near the entrance with her mother Marina and a few friends. When she saw Sophia Pess, she whispered something to her classmates, and they all laughed. Marina looked at Grandma Helen with a superior smile, as if she had already won a battle. Sophia squeezed her grandmother's hand, trying to find strength. Grandma Helen whispered words of encouragement in her ear, but inside the grandmother also felt the weight of that hostile environment. She looked for a discreet place for them to sit and await the start of the presentations. Principal Beatrice went up to the improvised stage to give a welcome speech. She spoke about the importance of education, individual talents, and the school community. Her words were beautiful, but empty for those who knew the omission that allowed Sophia to suffer so much. The presentations began. Children sang, danced, played instruments, recited poetry. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Parents proudly filmed. Teachers smiled contentedly. It was a celebration of blossoming young talents. Sophia's presentation was scheduled for the middle of the event. As she waited her turn, sitting beside her grandmother, her anxiety grew. She looked around for her father, but he was nowhere to be seen. Would he not come? Had something happened? Grandma Helen also looked for her son, starting to worry. She checked her watch several times, bit her lips nervously. She trusted Richard, but couldn't help but feel apprehension. Finally, it was Sophia's turn. The physical education teacher responsible for coordinating the artistic presentations called her name over the microphone. Sophia stood up, her legs trembling, and walked towards the stage. She felt all eyes on her, heard whispers, saw some mocking smiles. She climbed the makeshift steps and stood in the center of the stage. The music she had chosen began to play, a soft piano melody. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and began to dance. She danced with all her heart. Every movement was an expression of everything she had held inside her in recent weeks. The pain, the frustration, the loneliness, but also the hope, the love, the strength she found to continue. It wasn't a professional choreography. It was the simple steps a 6-year-old girl had rehearsed in her grandmother's backyard. But there was a genuine emotion that touched those willing to see it. Some people in the audience stopped talking to watch. Others remained indifferent, but Sophia no longer cared. She was dancing for herself, for her grandmother, for the father who believed in her. The music ended and Sophia took her final bow. The applause was polite, lukewarm, without enthusiasm. She stepped off the stage and returned to her seat beside Grandma Helen, who hugged her tightly, whispering that it had been beautiful, that she was proud. It was at this moment that a different noise began to attract attention. From outside the school, the sound of a powerful, elegant engine. People near the entrance turned their heads, curious. The school gate, which was open during the event, offered a view of the street, and it was through there that everything changed. A latest model black Mercedes-Benz slowly entered through the gate. The car was immaculate, with chrome wheels shining in the sun, tinted windows, and a presence that commanded attention. It advanced elegantly across the schoolyard, stopping precisely in front of the stage. Silence fell. Presentations were interrupted, conversations ceased, all heads turned to the car. Who could it be? Some authority figure, an important sponsor. The driver's door opened and a man in a suit stepped out, walking to the rear door. When he opened it, Richard emerged. But it wasn't the Richard everyone knew. He wore an impeccably tailored dark grey suit, a crisp white shirt, polished Italian shoes. His hair was perfectly styled, the Swiss watch on his wrist discreet but unmistakable. He had the demeanor of someone who commanded boardrooms, who made decisions that moved millions, who was respected in any environment he entered. Murmurs began. Who is that man? What is he doing here? Where did he come from? Richard walked with firm steps towards the stage. With each step, more people recognized those facial features. That bearing and incredulity took over their faces. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. Grandma Helen stood up, tears in her eyes. Sophia looked at her father, confused at first, then with a shy smile appearing on her face. It was him. It really was him. Marina, who was talking with other mothers near the stage, felt her heart race. There was something familiar about that man, but it couldn't be Sophia's father. It wasn't possible. Rebecca tugged on her mother's sleeve, pointing. "Mom, that man looks like Sophia's dad." Marina gave a nervous laugh. "Don't be silly, dear. That's someone important. It has nothing to do with her." But the certainty began to crack when Richard walked right past them, and Marina saw his face up close. It was him. It was impossible, but it was him. Richard ascended the stage. He picked up the microphone from its stand and adjusted its height. The silence was absolute. Not even a child made a sound. Everyone waited, mesmerized, to see what would happen. "Good morning, everyone. I know my presence here has caused surprise, and I apologize for interrupting the event. My name is Richard Tavares, and I am Sophia's father." A collective murmur swept through the crowd. People looked at each other, trying to process the information. Richard continued, his voice firm but serene. "In recent weeks, my daughter has suffered greatly in this school. She has been ridiculed, humiliated, isolated, all because she told the truth about me, about our family, and no one believed her. They judged her by the house we live in, by the car I drive, by the clothes we wear, and based solely on that, they decided she was a liar." Marina felt her face flush. Other mothers around her began to shift uncomfortably. Teacher Eleanor, who was near the stage, turned pale. Richard continued, taking some documents from the inside pocket of his jacket, which he handed to Marcus, his assistant, who had arrived discreetly and was now standing beside the stage with a tablet. I manage a business group that my family has built over 3 generations. We have companies in 6 states, investments in various sectors, and yes, considerable assets. Marcus, please, can you show the people? Marcus connected the tablet to a projector the school used for educational presentations. On the white wall next to the stage, official documents appeared. Company registrations, articles from financial newspapers mentioning the Tavares Group, photos of Richard at corporate events. It was irrefutable proof. People looked at the screen, then at Richard, then at Sophia, trying to process the reality that shattered their certainties. How was it possible? How could someone with so much money live that way? Richard answered the unverbalized question. I chose to live simply because I believe that true wealth is not in mansions or luxury cars. It is in character, in humility, in the love we offer and receive. I wanted to raise my daughter away from futility, away from ostentation, teaching her values that I consider fundamental. He paused, looking directly at the people who had hurt Sophia the most, but I didn't imagine that by doing so, I would be exposing her to another kind of cruelty, the cruelty of judgment based on appearances, the cruelty of adults who taught their children to ridicule a 6-year-old child because she didn't fit their superficial expectations. Marina wanted to disappear. She felt all eyes turning to her, who had been the most vocal in her criticisms. She tried to retreat into the crowd, but there was nowhere to go. Richard looked at Sophia, who was standing beside Grandma Helen, tears streaming down her face. Sophia, my little one, you endured with a courage that adults would not have. You told the truth even knowing that no one would believe you. You maintained your dignity even when they tried to take it from you. And today, in front of everyone who judged you, I want to say that I am the proudest father in the world, proud not of the money I have, but of the integral and courageous daughter you are. He walked to Sophia and picked her up, taking her back onto the stage. The girl buried her face in her father's shoulder, crying, releasing weeks of accumulated pain. Richard held her tightly, kissing the top of her head. The crowd was in silent shock. Some people began to cry, touched by the scene. Others wore expressions of shame, realizing the magnitude of the mistake they had made. Eleanor, the teacher, was paralyzed. She remembered every time she let Sophia be humiliated, every ambiguous phrase that planted doubts about the girl's sanity. She felt shame burn within her. Rebecca looked at Sophia on stage with a confused expression. For the first time, she began to understand what she had done. It wasn't an innocent game. She had hurt someone deeply. Richard spoke again, now with a softer tone. I did not come here to humiliate anyone or to seek revenge. I came to restore my daughter's dignity and to teach a lesson that I hope everyone will take home. Do not judge by appearances. Do not measure a person's worth by what they have or what they wear. And most importantly, believe children when they tell the truth. He placed Sophia back on the ground and knelt beside her, getting to his daughter's eye level. You are my greatest wealth, Sophia, and nothing I have is worth more than you. Sophia hugged her father again, and this time the applause that erupted was genuine. It began timidly but grew, filling the entire yard. People applauded not out of duty, but because they were witnessing something true, something that touched the heart. In the minutes that followed, as Richard descended from the stage with Sophia, people began to approach. The first was Eleanor. She approached with hesitant steps, her eyes red. Mr. Tavares, Sophia, I am so sorry. Truly, I should have protected you, Sophia, and I completely failed. I have no excuses for my conduct. Richard looked at her seriously. You are right. You should have protected her. Teachers are guardians, not just of knowledge, but of dignity and respect. I hope this serves as a lesson. Eleanor nodded, unable to say anything more, and walked away carrying the weight of guilt. Next, Marina approached. She was visibly shaken, trying to maintain her composure but failing. She looked at Grandma Helen and Sophia before speaking. I have no words to express my shame. I was cruel, prejudiced, and completely unfair. Grandma Helen, Sophia, I ask for your forgiveness from the bottom of my heart. Grandma Helen, who had every right to be harsh, simply nodded. It was not a time to add to anyone's pain. It was then that Rebecca let go of her mother's hand and walked up to Sophia. The two girls looked at each other for long seconds. Rebecca had tears streaming down her face. "Sophia, I was really mean to you. I hurt you on purpose, and now I understand I was wrong. Can you forgive me?" Sophia looked at the girl who had been her greatest torment. She saw in her no longer an aggressor, but a child who was also learning, who also had her own insecurities and pains. And with the wisdom that only pure hearts possess, Sophia extended her hand. "I forgive you." The two embraced, and in that childlike, sincere, and transformative hug was the most important lesson of all. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, but it means choosing not to let resentment poison the heart. Other children approached, some apologizing, others just wanting to be near Sophia now that they understood who she truly was. Even adults who had participated in the judgments approached, acknowledging their mistakes. From a distance, Mr. Anthony observed everything with a contained smile and tears in his eyes. He saw justice being done, dignity being restored, the triumph of truth over prejudice. At that moment, he felt that his small gestures had been worthwhile, that planting seeds of hope is never in vain. Principal Beatrice approached Richard with a proposal. "Mr. Tavares, we would like to do something to rectify the mistake. We thought of creating a mural in Sophia's honor, with phrases about values and respect. We could also hold a special assembly where she would be publicly recognized." Richard looked at the principal serenely and shook his head negatively. "I appreciate the intention, but it is not necessary. Our lesson was learned in the silence of actions, not in the noise of recognitions. Sophia does not need murals or tributes. She only needs respect, the same respect that every child deserves, regardless of who they are or what they have." Beatrice nodded, understanding. It was a lesson in humility coming from someone who had every reason to demand public recognition. The event continued, but with a completely different atmosphere. The subsequent presentations were watched with more attention, with more empathy. People looked at each other differently, questioning how many hasty judgments they made every day. When the event ended in the late afternoon, Richard drove Grandma Helen and Sophia back home in the Mercedes. The luxurious car seemed out of place in that simple neighborhood, but upon arriving, Richard made a point of parking the old Chevy Nova next to it. That image, the two cars side by side, perfectly symbolized who he chose to be. Inside the simple house, they shared a dinner made by Grandma Helen. Rice, beans, steak, and salad. Nothing sophisticated, nothing ostentatious. And as they ate, they talked about the day, about everything that had happened. "Sophia, do you understand now why I chose to live this way?" Sophia chewed thoughtfully before answering. "I think so, Dad. You wanted to teach me that what matters isn't what we have, but who we are." Richard smiled, proud. "Exactly. And you learned the most important lesson of all. You learned that even when everyone doubts you, if you are telling the truth, you need to maintain your integrity." Sophia thought for a moment. "Dad, it was very difficult. There were times I wanted to give up, wanted to stop telling the truth." "I know, my daughter, and you are perfectly right to feel that. But look at what you achieved. You showed these people that they were wrong. You taught them a lesson about prejudice and humility, and you did all that while keeping your heart kind, forgiving those who hurt you." Grandma Helen wiped a tear, moved by the conversation. She saw that her son had been right from the beginning. The lesson had been painful, but necessary. That night, Sophia slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. She dreamed of the cherry plum tree, of Mr. Anthony's notes, of her father's embrace on stage. She dreamed of a world where people looked beyond appearances. The following Monday, Richard went out again in the old Chevy Nova. He put on his simple clothes again, and Sophia, dressed by Grandma Helen, went to school with the same sandals as always, the same old backpack, the same braids made by her grandmother. But when she arrived at the gate, something was different. The children greeted her. Adults waved with respect. And when she entered the classroom, Rebecca was sitting at her desk but had left the chair next to it empty, with a note on top that read, "I saved this for you." Sophia smiled, sat next to her former aggressor, who now became a friend, and realized that the world, despite all its imperfections, still had room for transformation, for forgiveness, for new beginnings. The story of Sophia and Richard spread through the community in the following days, not through newspapers or social media, but by word of mouth, transformed into a lesson. Parents began to talk to their children about judgments. Teachers revised their attitudes. The school implemented a program on empathy and respect for differences. And in that simple house in the Northwood district of Portland, a family continued to live as they always had. With love, with simplicity, with values that no money can buy, because they discovered that true wealth does not shine, does not flaunt, does not show off. It simply is. And it is present in every hug, in every word of encouragement, in every gesture of unconditional love. When all that is material loses its luster, when appearances vanish like mist in the sun, what truly remains is the love given and the love received. And that is the only wealth that can never be destroyed. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Sophia, Richard, and Grandma Helen has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this family's journey, if you reflected on the judgments we make based on appearances, if you felt the importance of forgiveness and truth, please like this video now, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what moment stood out to you most in this story. Every day we bring intense narratives like this that reveal the deepest side of the human soul and make us question the values that truly matter in life. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you see the world differently.